Hi there, Smart Drivers. Rick with Smart Drive Test talking to you today about autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles, and why these are not going to take over our roadway anytime in the 21st century. I got 6 reasons why they're not going to overtake our roadways. Now, just before we get started here, be sure to hit that subscribe button just about there. That way you'll get access to all of the great information for those of you working towards a license or starting a career as a truck or bus driver. As well, be sure to hit that bell. That way you'll get instant notification. Now, autonomous vehicles have been made famous by Tesla and Elon Musk, who is the public figure, the billionaire who started the company, and his team, and as well, social media and the media in general have promoted that autonomous vehicles are going to appear on our roadways very soon, when in fact they're probably not going to appear on our roadways anytime in the 21st century. I had a few smart drivers on the shifting theory video say that taxi drivers, bus drivers, and truck drivers very soon were going to be out of business as well. I've had a lot of smart drivers ask me why big trucks do not have automatic transmissions in them and why they still have non-synchromesh what's called as crash box transmissions, and why they're so difficult to drive. Well, technology, the limitation of technology and the sheer forces involved in moving huge amounts of weight in big trucks, some of them up to as much as 140,000 pounds or 63,500 kilograms. So they're big, heavy, and there are lots and lots of forces there, and you need some very durable technology in place in order to be able to move that kind of mass. Autonomous vehicles, 2 questions I'm going to ask you about autonomous vehicles. The first question I'm going to ask you is, when was the last time you rebooted your computer, restarted your computer to get it to work? Was it a week ago, a month ago, or a few months ago? Answer that question, just have a think about that. The second question I'm going to ask you is, if an autonomous vehicle showed up outside your doorway, would you get in that vehicle and let it take you for a 2 or 3 hour drive? Just ask yourself that question while we're getting going here, and we'll be back to give you the 6 reasons why autonomous vehicles are not going to take over our roadways anytime in the 21st century. So stick around, we'll be right back. Hi there, Smart Drivers. Welcome back. Rick with Smart Drive Test talking to you today about 6 reasons why autonomous vehicles are not going to take over our roadways in the 21st century. The first reason is the simple complexity of driving. And that's an oxymoron when I say the simple complexity of driving, because driving is probably the most complex task that we do on a daily basis. Harold Smith, who is the originator of the idea of the Smith space cushion system, which is the basis of defensive driving, that he formulated that 70 years ago, and that still forms the basis of defensive driving and is the guiding principles for any driver education course that teaches defensive driving. Harold Smith came up with the idea of the Smith space cushion system and stated in that we as drivers make 100 decisions per kilometer or per mile of driving. So the decision-making process and the processing of information as we're driving is highly complex, highly dynamic, and ongoing. So the complexity of driving, the best analogy that I ever saw in terms of describing the complexity of driving was in the Vic Roads On the Road to Solo Driving, which is their driving manual there in the state of Victoria in Australia. And they came up with this analogy between sports and driving. Now, if I asked you the question of whether sports is dynamic or whether sports is static, most of us, myself included when I was first asked this question, would say that sports in fact is dynamic. However, if you take a closer look at sports and look at the field of sports, regardless of whether you're playing hockey, you're playing football, you're playing netball, or whatever sport you're playing, the field or the court is the same dimensions all the time. So if you're playing basketball, you're playing on the same court, the lines are in the same place, the distances between the lines is the same for that sport. Same with hockey, same with gridiron football, or whatever sport you're playing. The field is the same all of the time. The players who are playing the sport are all approximately the same age, they're the same gender, they have the same ability, so all the players are the same. The equipment that they use is the same. They all have the same equipment. If they're playing gridiron football, for example, they all have helmets on, they all have shoulder pads and knee pads and other types of protective equipment that they're using to play the game. They play the game at the same time every day, and for the most part, if they're playing footy in Australia, or you're playing soccer, or you're playing gridiron football, the seasons are the same every year. You play it at the same time of year, so the lighting conditions are going to be the same all of the time. And then the objective of the players is the same: to score a goal. Now, if you look at that in terms of driving, the task of driving is that the playing field that drivers are driving on is not the same. You can start at your house on a residential road, drive out onto a 2-lane roadway that's 60 kilometers an hour, 40 miles an hour, and then be out on a highway within a few short minutes, and driving on a roadway that can be 80 kilometers an hour, 100 kilometers an hour, 50 or 100 miles an hour. So the playing environment for driving is different. The people who are driving are all different ages and abilities in their driving. Many of them will have physical disabilities that will limit their ability to drive and those types of things. They're all driving with different types of vehicles. Road users can be pedestrians, cyclists, scooters, people on scooters, motorcycles, cars, trucks, buses, big trucks, trams and trolleys, all of those types of things. So the equipment that we're using on our roadways varies vastly. The ability of the players. We can drive at any time of the day, 24 hours in the dark, in the light, glaring sun, pouring rain, driving snow, all of those types of things, and weather is going to have a huge impact on our ability to drive. And then finally, the objective of the drivers is not the same as the sports players. The objective of drivers can be anything. They're going anywhere. They're going to the grocery store. They're going to see their friends. They're going to church or whatnot. So the objective of the drivers is different. So you can see that there's some a good analogy there which describes how dynamic driving is and how complicated that task of driving is and how much it requires us to be able to make decisions ongoing as we're driving all of the time, and to process that information that's coming in. And not all of the information for driving is visual information, only about 90% of it. There's another bit of that information that is listening to the vehicle and feeling the vehicle, smelling different environments and those types of things that also are information that is relevant to driving. So are computers going to be able to do that in terms of autonomous vehicles and the simple complexity of driving? The second reason that autonomous vehicles are not going to overtake our roadways anytime soon is technology. The sheer amount of R&D that is going on in terms of developing technology to pilot these vehicles is astronomical, and probably the leader of the technology to build autonomous vehicles is Google and the Google cars, which have driven hundreds of millions of miles accident-free. Now the question that I ask is how many support personnel are sitting in the background making sure that those vehicles are going where they're supposed to be going? Or is it simply the software and computer engineering that is allowing that vehicle to go forward? And in terms of technology, one of the factors is the size of the technology. You see that large dome on top of the Google car, and the LiDAR as it's called, which allows a 360-degree scan of its environment. That is a huge piece of technology. Now, are you going to be able to take that technology and shrink it down so that it's in the vehicle and makes the vehicle look attractive, like a sports vehicle, like a high-end premium car that people are going to buy and want to buy? Or do they want that big dome on the top of their vehicle? People are not going to be attracted to that kind of technology. So somehow the technology, the sensor technology that you need to pilot vehicles autonomously up and down the roadways is going to have to be able to be in a size that they can hide it in the vehicle and it's not really readily apparent, or the shape of vehicles is going to have to change dramatically. So that is one aspect of the technology. The other aspect of the technology is, how does this technology navigate these vehicles? Do we have some sort of guiding strip in the roadway? Some of the preliminary sensors detect road markings. What if the road marking is off? Do they use global positioning satellites? And as we know, global positioning satellites, even in this day and age, are only accurate to about 2 meters in most places. And when you're driving, sometimes satellites and the tracking and the piloting of the vehicle has to be within inches or centimeters. It cannot be within 2 meters, because if you're within 2 meters, you're going to have a crash. So how does the technology move these vehicles and pilot these vehicles up and down the roadway? And finally, the other question about technology and whether it's going to be able to move the vehicle up and down the roadway is digitized maps. Can these use digital maps in order to navigate the vehicles up and down the roadway? And as it says in an article by Will Knight, yes, the article was written 4 years ago, but it's still relevant to today's technology in the fact of keeping digital maps up to date. The world is ever changing. We're changing roads, we're building new structures and those types of things. The monumental task of keeping those digital maps up to date to pilot these autonomous vehicles up and down the roadway cannot be underestimated. So the technology, the size of the technology, and then bringing the technology down to a size that you can fit it into a modern autonomous vehicle and make it attractive to the consumer and make it affordable to the consumer so that the consumer will want to buy the vehicle and allow it to go up and down the roadway is another limiting factor. And just going back to the complexity of driving, I know some of you are going to mention Blue, the computer a few years ago, maybe a couple of decades now, that was able to beat and match the top chess players in the world. And again, I come back to the analogy that I used in reason number one of the complexity of driving is again, chess is on a board and the movements of the chess players, or the chess pieces rather, is static and open to mathematical calculation and is very cut and dry. And of course, there aren't any risk of life in terms of playing chess. So the computer technology and the ability of computers to reach a level of artificial intelligence that somewhat simulates our brain and our ability to make decisions at an ongoing pace is going to be one of the limiting factors in terms of autonomous vehicles becoming available to mass consumerism. The third reason why autonomous vehicles are not going to be overtaking our roadways anytime soon is ergonomics. And this ergonomics is the very reason that Joshua Brown was killed on the 7th of May in 2016 in the state of Florida, driving his Tesla car. Now what happened is that the sensors on the Tesla car became confused by the bright sunlight glaring off the side of a white semi-trailer, and the vehicle drove into the side of the trailer, unfortunately killing Joshua Brown. He was the first fatality in an autonomous vehicle crash. And there was an investigation which exonerated the Tesla company in the fact that there were no less than 6 warnings for Joshua Brown to take over. This raises a very serious question in terms of the technology of autonomous vehicles, the interaction between humans and machines, which is called ergonomics. It's our interaction between machines, which makes them easier for us to use, makes them user-friendly, and as well makes them safe. So is the technology going to be safe? Now, the first generation of autonomous vehicles is going to require the attention of the driver. Now, don't get me wrong in terms of all of this that I'm talking about, that they aren't coming anytime soon. I'm all for autonomous vehicles. I want an autonomous vehicle. I want a vehicle that I can go out and get into and I can read a book or talk on the phone or have a conversation with somebody else, you know, in the movies, the way it is in the movies. I would love to be able to do that. However, this first generation of autonomous vehicles, when somebody has to interact with the vehicle and take over, if the sensors become overwhelmed or the computer cannot deal with the traffic situation that is being presented to it, how long does it take that driver, him or her, to come back into that complex driving situation? You have to assess the situation and you have to determine what action to take in a very small space of time, sometimes a fraction of a second. Is the sensors and the technology in the vehicle going to be able to give you enough warning that you're going to be able to come back, assess the situation, and take appropriate action to interact with that vehicle. And that right now is probably the biggest barrier to autonomous vehicles being on our roadways and being allowed on our roadways. That issue of ergonomics and the interaction between human beings and the autonomous vehicle, and the autonomous vehicle not being able to handle the situation, and the human being or the driver having to come back into it and take over and make a safe decision and make a strategic move that is going to potentially save their life and other road users' lives. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is probably the biggest barrier to autonomous vehicles not becoming widespread anytime soon. Reason number 4 of why autonomous vehicles are not going to take our roadways over anytime soon is the issue of ethics. And the issue of ethics was explored in the movie I, Robot, starring Will Smith, which also had autonomous vehicles in it, but it wasn't the autonomous vehicle that made an ethical decision. In the movie I, Robot, the ethical decision was there was a crash on a bridge involving Will Smith's vehicle and another vehicle containing a little girl, and the robot in the movie saved Will Smith, made calculations about the chances for survival in the event of the crash, didn't save the little girl and saved Will Smith. Well, he lived with that guilt that the robot did not save the little girl when that's the ethical choice that it should have made, as opposed to saving him. And he felt bad about that and carried that guilt, and that guilt influenced his decisions and his feelings about the robots in the movie, even though he was a cop. So it's an interesting movie, so have a look at it. But it comes back to autonomous vehicles. If there's going to be a crash, and there will be crashes because it's traffic and it's motor vehicles, and there's always crashes. There are 33,000 people a year killed in the United States of America due to traffic crashes, and it's exponentially more than that who are injured in traffic crashes. So there are going to be crashes. And the ethical decision-making process of this computer technology, is it going to decide, for example, if the vehicle is coming through an intersection and a child steps off the curb into the path of the vehicle, is that vehicle going to choose to run over the child or sideswipe the vehicle beside it? These are the ethical decisions and ethical decision-making processes that need to be considered with these computers that are guiding autonomous vehicles. And this is going to come to the fore, because all of the choices that these computers need to make in order to safely navigate a vehicle down the roadway needs to be programmed into the software. In addition, these ethical decisions that are going to be debated for years and years and years to come, how do you teach a computer to make an ethical choice between a small child and sideswiping another vehicle where there probably won't be any injuries or fatalities in that sort of a crash, because sideswipe crashes are usually very low casualties and very low injuries. But again, there are many variables that go into that, and it's a dynamic situation and things could change. The vehicle could hit a curb or a cement barrier or flip over or something like that. Then you do have fatalities in the crash. So there's ethical decisions as well that need to go into this. And these really tough questions need to be answered, and until these really tough questions are answered, autonomous vehicles probably are going to be delayed being available for mass consumerism. The 5th reason that autonomous vehicles aren't going to be taking over our roadways anytime soon is the social protest. The protest of those heavily vested in the current infrastructure of drivers in cars and the, people who want to buy these vehicles, the manufacturing, the oil companies, and all of this huge infrastructure. For those of you who know me and have been following some of my videos, know that my doctorate thesis looked at the transition of horse-drawn traffic to motor traffic. So you're looking at the transition from one huge transportation infrastructure of the horse to another transportation system of the motor car. And there were huge battles that went on between those two infrastructures for the transition from one to the other, because it wasn't a simple transition. And you think of cars with drivers in them to an autonomous vehicle infrastructure, and the Will Knight, who wrote the MIT article, he talks about that a little bit. He talks about Google as being the forerunner in autonomous vehicles, but the fact that Google doesn't have any experience in building automobiles. So how do they build automobiles when they're an online search engine company that does online advertising. How do they go from that to building cars? So you have this huge social protest that's going to be in place. Not so much protest, but you're going to have a resistance. And in terms of that social protest, you're going to have hackers who are going to hack into the software, and that is going to be one of the other huge factors that's going to prevent the moving forward of autonomous vehicles. And just on an example of that, in the early 19th century in England, when the steam engine came in, it was applied to the loom, which was manufacturing textiles and our clothing and those types of things. When the steam engine came in, the steam engine was attached to these power looms, and one person with a steam engine loom could now do the work of 300 workers. You had the creation of the Luddites, who would break into textile plants and destroy these steam engines because they were being put out of work. So if we have autonomous vehicles coming in, and you now have taxi drivers and bus drivers and truck drivers and other people who deliver services and goods and freight as part of their job, what is the social protest? What is the pushback on that? Because these people are no longer employed because of autonomous vehicles are overtaking their jobs. And again, terrorism, hackers, those types of things. These are all questions and barriers that have to be answered in terms of autonomous vehicles. How are we going to replace those jobs? How are we going to put those people to keep working? So we have the social protest aspect and the transition from one huge automotive infrastructure to another huge automotive infrastructure that is going to see a lot of people being displaced, a lot of people being put out of work. And one more point about the social protest is the traditionalists. Those of us who like driving, we like driving cars. We don't want to get in an autonomous vehicle. We want to get in a vehicle, we want to have control of the vehicle, and we want to drive it. So that is another aspect of why autonomous vehicles aren't going to be taking our roadways over anytime soon. The last reason that autonomous vehicles are not going to be overtaking our roadways anytime soon, I've alluded to this earlier, but it's the cost of the technology and the cost of developing an enormous infrastructure to build, create, teach new drivers how to operate autonomous vehicles, and having, if they're going to be electric cars, we need to have more electric hookup outlets where we can recharge our vehicles and those types of things. So in terms of creating the technology and making the technology smaller, how much is that going to cost? As I alluded to earlier in the video, the LiDAR on the top of the Google car, that piece of technology costs $80,000. Well, for most of us, that is 10 times more what we're willing to pay for an automobile currently. So how long is it going to take the technology to come down in price? As well, again, the aesthetics of the motor vehicles, what is the vehicle going to look like with all of these sensors and those types of things in it, and what is the cost of making those smaller and making them readily available for mass consumerism? Is that even a possibility that we can, that engineers, automotive engineers, software engineers, and everyone else who is involved in the development of this technology, is it ever going to be feasible to create an entire infrastructure with autonomous vehicles? And the other thing, the question becomes in terms of cost, if the price of a motor vehicle goes up to $60,000 or $70,000, that is probably right on the sort of high watermark of the amount of money that we as consumers are willing to pay for an automobile. And then the thing is that we say, okay, it's an autonomous vehicle and it's $60,000. Are we just willing to drive our own vehicles and say, listen, I can pick this one up for $20,000 or $25,000 or $30,000, and I'm going to drive that motor vehicle? So these are the other questions. And the last one, it always comes down to the cost of the vehicle. How much is the cost of the vehicle, and does the cost of the vehicle outweigh the benefits? Are the benefits of having an autonomous vehicle going to be worth the cost of having it? And they talk about this, is that we're going to have increased fuel economy because the vehicles are going to be able to follow closer together, and they're going to get better fuel economy. We're going to reduce congestion in large cities and those types of things. I really don't think that the technology is even close to beginning to have the benefits of all of that they're projecting for autonomous vehicles, that they're going to reduce traffic congestion, they're going to reduce pollution, they're going to have a smaller environmental footprint, and the fact that they're going to increase the economy of vehicles and those types of things. And what are these vehicles even going to be powered by? Are they going to be petrol engines in another 20 or 30 years? Are we still going to be drilling for oil and those types of things? So the last factor of why autonomous vehicles are not going to be taking over our roadways anytime soon is the cost, and the cost versus the benefits. And do mass consumers, do the general public, do we want these autonomous vehicles, or do we want to continue to drive our own vehicles? So that's the last reason why autonomous vehicles won't be taking over our roadways anytime soon. Quick review of why autonomous vehicles will not be overtaking our roadways anytime. The first reason was the complexity of driving, the sheer number of decisions that need to be made by drivers, and as well in the article by Will Knight, the MIT article, he was talking about being in a cab in Europe, and the driver said to him that the reason that taxi drivers were so good was the seventh sense, that heightened awareness of being able to determine traffic patterns and the actions of other road users on the roadway as you're driving. And it's kind of like any professional who does something all the time. Drivers who work for a living have a higher sense and ability to predict traffic patterns and the actions of other road users. So that's the first reason why autonomous vehicles are not going to overtake our roadways anytime soon. The second reason is technology. Just developing the technology and getting the technology to a point where it's not huge and cumbersome and compromises the aesthetic value of motor vehicles, because most of us do really like the lines of a fast sports car and what that looks like, and high-end cars and those types of things. So getting the technology to a point where not only is it small enough to fit into motor vehicles, but also makes the motor vehicle look good and is reliable and can actually do the task of piloting the vehicle in traffic, not just on highways, but in our urban environments as well. The third one is ergonomics, the interaction between the driver and the vehicle, and whether the technology is going to be advanced enough that the driver doesn't have to come back into the driving task and take over and try to save him or herself and to save other road users on the roadway. Then there's the ethical issue of these computers in these vehicles, and when traffic crashes occur, what is the ethical dilemma that these computers, what is the decision that they're going to make? And if you haven't seen iRobot already, definitely have a look at that, because it addresses that ethical issue that these autonomous vehicles are going to have to address to be available to mass consumerism. And then as well, the social protest, the traditionalists who want to drive their own vehicles and don't actually want autonomous vehicles, the cost of the motor vehicle, that's another reason, is the cost of this technology, and is it going to outweigh the benefits of having self-driving vehicles, or are we just going to be more beneficial with people who work as taxi drivers, work as bus drivers or truck drivers? Does that benefit outweigh the cost? In other words, is it cheaper to pay people to drive vehicles, or the cost of the technology for autonomous vehicles, is it really going to have all of the benefits that they say it's going to have, of reducing congestion in urban areas, reducing the environmental footprint that vehicles currently have, and as well increasing fuel economy? The other question of autonomous vehicles and vehicles in the future in general is what is the power source that we are going to use? Are we still going to be driving petrol engines that burn gasoline and diesel fuel in another 20, 30, 40 years? And I know that the media is touting electricity as the new environmental fuel source for cars, but the problem is that somehow electricity has to be generated. Here in North America, we're one of the few countries in the world that actually generates electricity from hydroelectric dams, where we're using the power of water to generate electricity. A lot of countries in the world still burn coal to generate electricity. So that is not really a viable environmental alternative to petrol engines, because we can make petrol engines more efficient. I'm thoroughly convinced that we in fact can make petrol engines more efficient, but electricity is not the viable alternative that we're looking for in terms of a power source to reduce the environmental footprint of motor vehicles. So the social protest component consists of people who are going to lose their jobs because of autonomous vehicles, as well people who are resistant to the technology and are going to hack the software in these autonomous vehicles and present a form of terrorism that has to be dealt with in terms of autonomous vehicles. Because when that happens, when we get people who are hacking the technology, the same as the Luddites in the early 19th century who broke into steam factories and destroyed the equipment, you get hackers hacking into the software and people are dying. dying, it makes it so that it's not reliable and people don't feel safe. And when people don't feel safe, they're not going to buy the technology. So that's the last, one of the biggest barriers, one of the bigger barriers to autonomous vehicles not overtaking our roadways. Question for my smart drivers: do you think that autonomous vehicles are going to come to our roadways sooner than the 22nd century? Leave a comment down in the comment section there. All of that helps out the new drivers and, you know, adds to the discussion here about autonomous vehicles, because personally I'm all for autonomous vehicles, but I do want them to be safe before I get in one. So leave a comment down in the comment section there. It'd be interesting to hear what you have to say about autonomous vehicles. If you like what you see here, share, subscribe, leave a comment down in the comment section. As well, hit that thumbs up button. Check out all the videos here on the channel if you're working towards a license or starting your career as a truck or bus driver. As well, head over to the Smart Drive Test website. Awesome information over there and tremendous online courses that you can purchase. All of the courses at the Smart Drive Test website are guaranteed. Pass your road test first time or your money back, 30-day guaranteed. I'm Rick with Smart Drive Test. Thanks very much for watching. Good luck on your road test. And remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Have a great day. Bye now. And then, the second reason is